Napoleon Bonaparte, the one-time master of all Europe, is probably my favorite historical figure out there. I'm a massive fan of Napoleon. From his brilliant strategies to his important battles, his campaigns in Egypt, and the battles of Austerlitz, his invasion of Russia, his defense of France after losing the Battle of Leipzig. I love to study all about Napoleon. As you can see, I love to study about Napoleon. And all the way back in November of 2023, Ridley Scott directed a movie about this important historical icon. As you could tell, I'm, again, a massive fan of Napoleon Bonaparte, so I was really, really excited to watch the Napoleon movie. I am also a massive fan of movie scores. It's one of my favorite genres to listen to of music. So, coming as a massive Napoleon fan and a massive fan of movie scores, I could not wait to listen to the soundtrack for the Napoleon film by Martin Phipps. And overall, I would say there are some aspects of this soundtrack that are disappointing. I feel like it's much smaller scale. I'll get more into that later on in the interview. But yeah, I feel like the score is very much smaller scale, and I found it disappointing at times. I really wanted a complex theme for Napoleon that was really maybe akin to the Davy Jones theme or something like that. I would also really have liked a triumphant, epic victory music, kind of like they have a really good victory theme in Gladiator. I was kind of seeking out something like that, something triumphant, epic. Also, I would really like a sad kind of theme for when Napoleon loses his battles, like Waterloo, and loses pretty much everything in a very, very short period of time. This was what I was expecting from the Napoleon score, and it did not deliver on what I expected. Despite this, Martin Phipps, I feel like, presented a capable score that had some really great highlights in the soundtrack. But before we continue, I would like to get some criteria down on how exactly I am going to be judging the Napoleon soundtrack. And pretty much the only thing I am going to be using as criteria for judging the Napoleon score is whether the songs in the soundtrack are enjoyable to listen to. Will I want to stop in my free time when I have my headphones on and listen to some of the tracks in the Napoleon soundtrack? I'm not really going to be judging it off of how well it works with the movie, just because I'm just not going to be doing that. I principally listen to movie soundtracks because I enjoy listening to them, not really because of how they work with the movie. But despite this, I will say right off the bat, the score does not really work that well with the movie. Just going to put that right out there. But was the soundtrack enjoyable to listen to? That is the question. And I think overall it was enjoyable to listen to. Some of my favorite kind of songs from the Napoleon soundtrack include Napoleon's Piano, The Soldiers of the 5th Regiment, and Austerlitz Cry. I believe that's how you pronounce it. Those are some of the highlights for me from the score. Starting out with Napoleon's Piano, I feel like they delivered a very great Napoleon theme. So Napoleon's Piano kind of presents the main kind of, I guess the correct term is motive for Napoleon. It's kind of his main character theme throughout the movie. And overall, I liked the theme for Napoleon. I especially liked it how it kind of started out with this kind of, I don't know if it's harpsichord or piano. It says Napoleon's Piano, but it doesn't really sound like a piano. But anyways, I'm getting ahead of myself. So in Napoleon's Piano, you hear this beginning part, and you kind of hear the main theme from Napoleon. It's very short, very simplistic, but I feel like this song gets really, really good by the middle point, where they have a singer in the background kind of following the same kind of theme that we've heard on piano before, and I really, really liked it. Again, the theme's very, I feel like, simplistic, but it reminds me of kind of French-ish music, and I really just like the overall sound of the theme and how this score works. I really enjoyed Napoleon's Piano. The other highlight from the soundtrack was Soldiers of the 5th Regiment. So I really like the song because it kind of delivered on the whole epic part. It wasn't really exactly a massively epic song, as I was kind of hoping for the Napoleon soundtrack to be, but it still had this really cool humming in the background, and it sounded like soldiers marching, getting ready for battle. And so I really, really, really like listening to Soldiers of Fifth Regiment. Upon first listening to, that was actually my favorite song in the soundtrack before it getting overtaken by Napoleon's Piano after I listened to that song a couple of more times. But Soldiers of Fifth Regiment is a really great song. Again, it's kind of got this epic kind of building up to action kind of sound to it, and I really like it. It's like a preparing for battle kind of song. And again, really, really great theme that is used in the Napoleon movie. Finally, another highlight from there, from the Napoleon soundtrack, is Austerlitz Cry. And I really like this one because Austerlitz is one of Napoleon's great victories. It's one of his best victories. And I was kind of hoping for an epic, triumphant song, but I feel like this song really does work as well with this purely vocal kind of thing. Again, most of the soundtrack, they only use one or maybe two instruments at the same time, which kind of gives it this smaller scale kind of feel. I kind of wish it was grander, it had an orchestra, and it was really great and triumphant. But the Napoleon score itself, with just these very few kind of singers and instruments used in the film, I think is still effective. Again, I don't really think it was used that well in the movie, but I feel like it was effective. Like, again, Austerlitz cries. Instead of this grand triumphant thing for Napoleon's greatest victory, we have this kind of different song. And again, I thought it was a pretty decent song from the soundtrack. All the other songs, though, in the Napoleon soundtrack, aside from those top three, are okay. Bonaparte's Lament, I feel like, was a super underwhelming song from the soundtrack, because in a song called Bonaparte's Lament, I was more or less expecting a kind of sad, beautiful piano song, or something like that. Just this sad song for Napoleon's fall from grace, how he's now stuck on St. Helena, or whenever this score is played in the movie. And I really wish they kind of had, again, this kind of sad kind of song attached to Bonaparte's Lament. But instead, it wasn't really a sad song. I didn't really feel anything, honestly, when listening to Bonaparte's Lament. So that's why I didn't really like that. Downfall is another one where I figured it'd be kind of a sadder song, and it wasn't. Yeah, and in both of these songs, I think they used kind of this human vocal. I think possibly the same artist who did Austerlitz Cry, but I feel like it didn't work as well as it did then. All the other sounds from the soundtrack, again, are okay. They're not highlights. They're just kind of, I feel like, background music. They're not especially great. They're not especially bad. On the better side of kind of the average section of this playlist is the song Boulogne, which was Napoleon's first great victory. But again, all the rest of the songs in the soundtrack are kind of, I wouldn't recommend it. So, overall, my thoughts on the Napoleon score. The Napoleon score had some great highlights. Again, I liked Napoleon's Piano, Soldiers of the Fifth Regiment, and Austerlitz Cry. Those are the highlights of the soundtrack for me. But all the rest of the songs are okay. They're just okay, I guess. Again, really great songs. The three that I mentioned are really great songs. I love listening to those. And the rest are just okay, which is kind of what you expect in the soundtrack. Not every song is going to be some great song. There's usually just like the main title that's really, really good. And then all the rest is more or less just kind of there. And I feel like that's kind of happened with the Napoleon soundtrack, with there being these three highlights and the rest are just But overall, I feel like the score could have been a lot better. Again, great highlights in there, but I feel like we could have had a grander, more epic score, sadder themes for when Napoleon loses. All those things that I was expecting and were just not in this soundtrack. Not saying the soundtrack's bad, because it's really, really good. Definitely top 5 best soundtracks of 2023. But it could have been so much more. Instead of just using these like one instruments, like just in Napoleon's Piano. Really great song, but for the majority of the song, they only use one instrument. and I feel like they could have made it grander, much more epic than it actually was. So yeah, that is my review for the Napoleon soundtrack. Overall, I would give the score maybe 8.5 out of 10 stars overall. Really great soundtrack. I enjoy listening to it. Especially, again, keep mentioning those Napoleon's Piano, Soldiers of the 5th Regiment, and Austerlitz Cry. Those are the top recommendations of the soundtrack. But anyways, guys, that's my thoughts on the Martin Phipps score for the Napoleon soundtrack. Tell me what you guys think in the comments section below. And if you want to, please consider subscribing. Anyways, that's the end of the video, and I hope you enjoyed.